a group of stakeholders who were in supply chain, who were non-technical, and I had, the whole graphic of the nodes and everything, and it didn't land. And like, what was I expecting? Like, what was I? And that's not how it works. And there are ways.
Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. If you've ever felt like the data is speaking, why aren't you listening? Then you're at the right place. Today's guest is Kristen Kehrer. Kristen was a LinkedIn top voice in 2018 for data science and analytics. She has a Master's of Science in Applied Statistics, and in the last 13 years, she has done a lot of great work in AI and ML. In the past, she was a data science instructor at UC Berkeley, and now she's the founder of Data Moves Me LLC. And in this episode, we talk about a variety of topics. We talk about why it's important to build relationships with stakeholders and how you do it. We talk about how to understand the goals of your stakeholders and how to work more on high-value projects rather than those ad hoc requests, those data pools, as you probably have experienced. We also have a glimpse into the crystal ball because I'm asking her about the future of the data science role. And she also gives tips about how to present your data. She shares her framework for data storytelling and making your data not just speak, but sing. So grab a notebook or just a cup of coffee, and I hope you enjoy this episode because it's definitely gonna amplify your data's voice. Enjoy. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. Hope you're doing well.
Absolutely. I'm excited for today's episode because we have been exchanging LinkedIn chats and different conversations, but not in this way yet. So I'm excited to dive into different topics. And the first topic I would like to start with is more about your background. So can you tell us how you ended up in data and take us through that journey, all those decisions that you've made? I know there have been some rough parts. What do you want to share?
Yeah. So I went into math. I finished a bachelor's degree in math in 2004. Feels like a million years ago now. Probably wouldn't have been my decision. It was more my parents, but I went and I absolutely fell in love with it. And then I found a couple years later that I wasn't making the salary that I wanted. So I went back and got a master's degree in statistics. I had actually been working for a mortgage brokerage at the time, and it was the housing bubble burst in 2007, 2008. I was going to get laid off. All my friends were getting laid off. So I decided to hide in academia and get a master's degree in statistics, and it changed my life. My first job out, I was doing econometric time series analysis and forecasting in the utility industry. Which was actually really specialized and maybe one of the most technical jobs that I've had. I was building neural nets in 2012, 2011. But I actually found that I'd make more money in general analytics. So I moved over, and that's where I learned SQL. This is maybe 2013. I was in healthcare, and then I really found a home in e-commerce, marketing analytics and e-commerce, advanced analytics. So I was building models for things like behavioral customer segmentation, retention modeling, those sorts of things, which really lent fantastically, all those hypothesis tests I ran and analyzed to creating content and doing my own content marketing later. And so, I worked at Vistaprint for a while, which, supports small micro businesses with marketing materials. So it was sort of learning marketing both on the analytics side and on the what are small businesses doing. And then I moved over to Constant Contact, which is an email marketing solution. So now I was learning about email marketing. And I used those tools to start my own business. And then Just as I had gone off on my own, started my own business, I did really well. I almost replaced my corporate salary. Uh, COVID hit, and I had a 5-year-old and 2-year-old at the time who then came home full time, and I had to scale back a little bit. Then I spent some time as a developer advocate, which also, taught me a whole lot of skills. It was interesting too, sort of being more in the ML ops space. And then now I am back on my own again.
Yeah, back again. And what a few things I found very interesting here. You specifically name e-commerce and
Mhm.
also behavioral data. Is that a specific interest of yours? Also considering that you have done quite some marketing related work.
Yeah, I think it really is, and I don't know if it's because that's just where I've spent most of my time, but I do love looking at customer behavior because, I or we always have these opinions about what we think other people might do, and then you look at the data and you find that the majority of people are not choosing to do the thing that to me seemed obvious. But always looking at demographics, and even when I was in healthcare, understanding, how the people who might take an action are the single women over 50 years old versus, it's really hard to motivate young men to do things. I find it fascinating, and it really prompts me to dig deeper for sure.
Interesting. And do you think that because there are two parts come together, right? The analytical part, the data, and I assume also some part of psychology and
Mhm.
behavioral science or interest in how people make decisions. Do you think that part, that psychology part, also helped you in other areas working in data as a data scientist?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have no background in psychology, but when people ask me about being outside of the field and trying to get into it, one of the best analysts that I've worked with, his background was in psychology, and then he learned SQL and started to do these things. So I think, it's absolutely super relevant when we talk about analytics being a very multidisciplinary field. I think it's even more multidisciplinary than we give it credit for. Um, and I do find it absolutely fascinating, but it's more from the perspective of like, oh, look at what these people did, and less, reading psychology in a book.
Right, understand. And you mentioned that data science is a very multidisciplinary field. Um, what is your expectations in terms of how it will evolve over the years? Because there are a lot of new developments, of course. Do you see any trend? Do you think it will stay the same? Well, what's your take?
Yeah, it's interesting because now I've been doing this for, 13 years, and there have been, different times where we've implemented software where it felt like, there was going to be less use for me. I'm doing website analytics, and all of a sudden now we're getting Adobe Analytics where we just need to push some buttons and we can really look at that data analyzed and worrying, hey, is this going to take my job? But over time, the job has always constantly been evolving. And I've always found that as these new tools become available, it's always enabled me to focus on higher value questions and less of those ad hoc requests that, we'd always get. Can you do this data pull or whatever? It's opened me up to look at those higher value questions. And as we continue to, because of course we're moving at a much faster pace now in terms of these new tools coming out that are making our jobs easier, what I see happening is that the role of the data scientist is just going to, become a little bit larger in certain areas. I actually hate to talk about uh, data science and analytics in aggregate because there's such a difference in maturity of, the organizations that have a database in Excel versus some of those really mature, high tech, sexier organizations. So I don't like talking in aggregate in general, but I think that there are certain areas where the data scientist role, back in the day, I'd build a model, I'd hand it over to somebody to put it into production. Now we're looking at requiring or, expecting that data scientists are going to be able to help in the way of getting that model into production. And the roles, the number of hats that data scientists may wear or analysts may wear are, just going to be bigger because some of the things are going to get easier. Back in the day, we were, doing text analysis and you'd be manually filling in stop words or, and now you can just import a package and run a couple lines of code and that's handled for you. So there are, things that we don't have to do anymore. And there are, some ways where it's becoming a little easier, some ways in which it's becoming more difficult. But I just see people being able to wear, more hats than previously and work on higher value problems.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it to me, that you're able to work on those more high value parts of the job. And you mentioning that data scientists need to wear a variety of hats. What do you think are some of the challenges that come with that? That come with needing to do different things, not just the modeling, and also taking care of the implementation and start talking with stakeholders. What are some of the challenges you see appearing in reality?
Yeah, so I think definitely in terms of people trying to break into the space, if you asked me 10 years, so, quick story, my second job out of grad school when I realized that general analytics paid more, I got that job, I found it on Craigslist. They required SQL. I had no SQL. I sent them an email and I said, hey, I'm interested in this job. Here's my resume. I don't know SQL, but I'm competent. I literally put the word competent in this email and they wrote back. I had an interview and I had that job in a week and a half.
Wow.
Nowadays you can't really do that. And it's not only that, it's that, if you are looking to get a job in data science, they want to know that you have experiment tracking, that you have model monitoring, all these extra things that, 10 years ago, we didn't even have the tools to do. Like tools for reproducibility, we've only been hearing about for the last 5 or 6 years. And traditional education doesn't necessarily keep up with this as fast, or the data science programs only really started coming out in 2016, and a lot of times they didn't have SQL, they didn't have other things that a company is really going to be looking for. And in addition to that, now we're still in that same position. However, it's just with more tools, more technologies, more understanding of best practices. And I don't really have visibility into the more computer science side of things and how they are handling training and stuff like that, because of course, they use different best practices. They are using GitHub as a standard. So it may be slightly different over there, but I think that, getting into analytics is a lot more difficult, and you do have to understand a lot of different topics that you didn't have to know before, and they're not necessarily hard to pick up and understand. It's just there's a lot of them.
Yeah, definitely. So there's so many different tools and technical skills you need to be aware of, you need to learn. One other set of skills which are also important, we talked about this briefly before we started recording, is communication, because you have a lot of experience talking with different stakeholders and understanding and realizing that it's not always easy. What are some of the challenges you faced personally talking with stakeholders as a data scientist or other data roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? Because these stakeholders, they have their own goals, their own metrics that they are trying to optimize for. And typically in an analytics organization, you also are trying to deliver and they may not actually line up. I think also too often there is sort of this struggle of who owns test design, and I mean, it should obviously be analytics, but I have seen it go the other way, or, stakeholders wanting you to run tests on things where regardless of how the test turns out, they're already going to go with a certain decision. And learning to, one of the big problems that I see is that organizations will say, we need analytics, let's hire a data scientist or let's hire an analyst, and they put them in this role, and then they just get steamrolled by their stakeholders, right? Because it really takes somebody who's a little more senior who can push back a little bit and set them up for success, because unless you understand what's going um, to get you there, you'll end up just doing ad hoc analyses. You'll be, we need this data, we need that data, and you'll end up pulling that. But really, to be successful, you want to be including them in your stand-ups. You want to be going to their stand-ups. You want to understand what they care about, what they're working towards, what their goals are. But you also want them to see like what you can do for them and what it is you're working towards, so that they have some visibility into that, because there is a lot of infrastructure stuff. There's a lot of other things that you're working on that when they don't see it, they're just like, no, you're sitting there waiting for me to ask you for data. And you can really butt heads sometimes. I've had issues where, either there's like a lack of trust, or, people don't really want to hear my perspective on how things should be done. They want to delegate to me how it should be done. And it's really, a lot of it is just working on fixing that relationship so that you can work effectively together, and so that you can have the opportunity to demonstrate some of the higher value things that you'd be able to do for somebody that they just, they're not in data. It's not their job to know that. It's our job to find an effective way to work with them and to create processes around things like the hypothesis testing. I just created a sheet where if we're going to run a test, you're not going to lob it over the fence. We're going to talk about sample size. No, I'm sorry, I can't run your test if it's going to take us 6 months to get the sample size we need to analyze it. And really getting to a point where, there's a process and they start to understand the information that you need, why you need it. And everyone learns together and there's a real partnership.
Yeah, I love those points. So let me try to summarize them. So first of all, important to understand their goals. They have their own metrics, their own goals that they're working towards. So we need to, as data professionals, try to understand that and help them reach those goals. You mentioned attending business meetings, their stand-ups, or inviting them to your stand-ups. Also proactively reaching out to them, keeping them up to date. Also fixing the trust, increasing trust. And you said, yeah, it's our job to do that, right? And I love that, because I think many data professionals say, yeah, well, my job is to create models and that's where my responsibility ends. But if you want to make impact, you also need to build a relationship. It's like a two-way conversation. And
Absolutely.
I think too often the business stakeholders, they are kind of above or more assertive or more dominant in that relationship. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of like business savvy, for sure, and then just having this mindset that our relationship should be one way, because they maybe don't understand what we can provide.
Right. And how do you think we can improve that? Because partly you answered the question, is there more what we can do to create such an equal relationship and then to help the business understand we as data scientists or data professionals can provide, how we can add value?
Yeah, I mean, a big piece of it too is a lot of times when analysts present their work, they use terms that are too technical that the business doesn't understand, or they're just not giving enough context. And I think that, when you do a really good job with data storytelling, you know, people, to build that trust, people have to feel like you are talking with them. And when you are talking over their heads, I think a lot of, I know myself, when I first started in data, I wanted to sound smart. I was presenting the neural net that I built to a group of stakeholders who were in supply chain, who were non-technical. And I had, the whole graphic of the nodes and everything, and it didn't land. And like, what was I expecting? Like, what was I? And that's not how it works. And there are ways to, especially with the new packages for explainable AI, we can talk about the main drivers. We can talk about what that may look like. We can go in and find specific instances in the data and really highlight those, and start to tell the story. And that's a big way in building trust too, because that's how you make friends. You don't walk up to a new friend and just start talking in a language that they don't understand, and expect that relationship to go well. So yeah, I think a big piece of it is talking in a way that our stakeholders are going to understand, and then having a clear, defined process. It's like having children, like they just do better with routine. Everyone does better with routine. And just setting things up so that it's much more likely that you're going to be successful.
Nice. You mentioned the word data storytelling, the words data storytelling and routine. Now that makes me wonder if you have like a data storytelling routine. And what I mean with that is, if you need to go up and present to stakeholders, whether it's a model or insights, do you have kind of a routine or checklist or a methodology or an approach that you go through before delivering that message, apart from speaking their language? Do you have any frameworks or tips you could share?
That's so funny because, when I started in my career, it would take me like 2 months to put, not 2 months, 2 weeks to put together a PowerPoint about a project that I did. And, in more recent years, when I was doing data projects, it would take me maybe 2 days, because I knew, what I wanted to do. I was going to have an executive summary up front. In the beginning, creating presentations, it would be very like, here is graphs of each variable, and nothing would be brought up to the high level. And now it's like, I do my analysis, I look and say, okay, well, what is the overall picture? And it's not just what is the overall picture, it's what is the overall picture from the perspective of what the audience actually cares about. Because if you're talking to an executive, he may not actually care about one or some of the cool stuff that's going on there. And so it's creating that executive summary. And then I do like to go into the database and find 2 or 3 examples of, and because I spent a lot of time in e-commerce, I am typically talking about people, although when I was in the utility industry, it may have been specific days or specific weather patterns. So if we have pop-up thunderstorms, my model's not going to do well. So it doesn't need to be people, but for a lot of my career, it has been people. And I go in and I find them and say, okay, well, this person, they get their own slide. This is this person. This is the business they have. This is what their behavior looks like. Does that make sense based on, what it is we're doing, and what does that look like in terms of the overall picture? And so I will have a slide for 2 or 3 different people. And then I try to really bring the details of the whole project up high level. If I'm doing something like a customer behavioral segmentation, I'm not just going to talk about things at the variable level. Oh, this variable for that segment and this variable for that segment. I'm going to say, okay, this segment, this is what they look like. Okay, and now let's look at this segment. This is what this segment looks like, and here's how it's different from this segment. And here's how we can motivate them, because at the end of the day, really they care about, what can we do to get the result that we want. So here's their behaviors, but also like based on these behaviors, let's take it another level and say what we can do to motivate these people. And then, I go into my conclusion. And the length of this presentation is going to be different depending on my audience. Am I talking to product managers who are, almost peers? Am I talking to a director? Am I talking to a VP? If I'm talking to a VP, you're probably only getting 3 slides. There's going to be one slide that shows, just all 5 segments or whatever, and the high level view of those. Executive summary, segments, what we should do next. And so, yeah, lots of it depends, but definitely there's a framework there, and a lot of times that framework's in my head, but it exists.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds very structured. And when I can summarize in 1 or 2 sentences, it's create a high over level view of the insights, so the details to the appendix. And depending on the audience, make it shorter or a bit more extensive, focusing on their goals. And that also makes me wonder, how do you deal with mixed audiences? Because sometimes it's not just business stakeholders, but it's data people in there and business stakeholders, or maybe all business stakeholders, but some of them are more senior. How do you approach such a situation?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think I've historically, and I don't know that this is the right answer, but I've historically gone for like, who's the, big honcho in the room, and I'm going to tailor it for that. And if there are, other things, because basically too, if I make a presentation that's 30 slides long and I'm presenting to an audience where I know I should probably be using like 3 slides, and one of them maybe need to be reworked, but a lot of times the other slides are there, right? So I start with my 3 slide jobby, and then pick out additional things that might be interesting for the rest of the audience, but really tailor it to the person in the room that's the most senior.
Right. Yeah, and I think another advantage of that is that that person might also hold the budget. So if that person is not happy or does not understand the value of what you're doing, then maybe that person pulls the plug and the project will end, right?
Yeah,
No
where do
matter
I need to
how
get buy-in from? You're my guy? Okay, this presentation's for you.
exactly. No matter how enthusiastic the people lower on the ranks are in that presentation, if the senior stakeholder is not on board, then it's going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I love you sharing that framework. And it also reminds me of one video, or I'm not sure where I heard it, but I heard you speak about the now what and why that is important. So the now what, focusing the conversation on, all right, we have the insights, this is why they're important. What do we do now? Why is that so meaningful? Why do you think that is important for data professionals to include that piece? And what is it maybe?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that and of course it's all changing now. I don't have much visibility into the people that are coming out of college at this point, but when I learned how to give a presentation in grad school, it was, very scientific. It was, you talk about the methodology, you talk about the results, you're showing coefficients and p-values, and you're giving a conclusion, and the conclusion felt very, there might be next steps because the research is continuing, but it felt sort of conclusive. And in business, that's just not how it is. I mean, you can, you're not sharing the technical details. You're sharing the, why did we do this? What do we need to do to move the needle next? And a lot of times, like, that's sort of all people care about, especially if you've built up that trust and they trust that your analysis is correct. They just want you to tell them, what do I need to do to make some money? And so I think a lot of people, when they start in analytics, they do their analysis and they stop and they're like, and here it is by this variable, here it is by this variable. And isn't that, and I did the analysis and this is what we saw. And it's like, okay, well, cool. What do we do with it? Because if we're not, able to tie ourselves to revenue in some sort, then we're just a cost. So, like, but so, yeah, I think reminding people, especially junior analysts, that the important point and why we're doing this is because we want to understand how we can improve or what we can do for our customers to make them happier.
Yeah, it's my experience too that many, especially junior data professionals, they focus a lot on the what and maybe the so what, but the now what is often kind of implied or not very strong, and maybe people are not confident enough to take a stance like, hey, this is my recommendation, or I really think we should implement this. But I think it's always our responsibility to steer the conversation in that direction, even if we don't know what the recommendation is. Steer the conversation in that direction so that there's a next step or a decision by
And
the group or individual.
so something I want to make sure that I say before we move on, if we're moving on, is that um, it's also important too, because if you make a claim and there is a clear next step there, you want to put it on that slide. You want it written on that slide so you get credit for that idea. Because if you show something and somebody says, oh, well, you know what? Oh, because of that, we should do this. Now it's their idea. And so not that that's the most important thing in the world, but perception is such a huge piece of business. And if you are perceived as the person who can come up with innovative ideas for solving problems, that's different than not being that person. So that is something to think about, and think about, when you do something, what are next steps? Do you have any suggestions? And actually put it on that slide immediately.
Yes, completely agree. It's so important to have that in your presentation. And we talked a bit about understanding the goals of the stakeholders and understanding how our model or our data work contributes to that, and pointing that out to maybe kind of sell why it's important and show them why they should act. The question in my head is, how do we understand those goals? How can we ask the right questions? Do you have any questions that you often ask stakeholders, or what's your approach to grasp the context or the view, stepping in the shoes of the stakeholders?
Yeah, so I call it going on tour. And I will set up meetings with different, I'll sit down with operations, and I will sit down with my marketing stakeholders, and I will go around and ask those questions. And when it is time to, because I need to get buy-in on this project, and to get buy-in, I want to go around and I want to get people jazzed. But it also gives me the opportunity to ask them about how this is going to benefit them. What do they need to see from this project to make it useful for them? Because I don't want to build something that's not useful, because that's a waste of my time. I also don't want to build something that I actually do have like a POC or two on my resume. But the things that really make it to your resume are the places where you are able to finish a project and save some man hours, because that's worth money, or you're able to increase conversion, or any of the other metrics. But this goes back to stakeholder communication. It really is setting up those meetings, getting the right people in the room, and just having an honest dialogue about would this benefit you, and how would that benefit you, and how can I help you with that? And let me explain it to you in a way that you are going to understand. And those are sort of the pieces that keep things moving pretty smoothly.
100%. It's so important to understand it. So thank you for sharing those tips to understand their goals better. I would love to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about content creation, about LinkedIn, social media, because you have a very big following on LinkedIn, 90,000 plus, I believe.
Mhm.
And why did you start creating content?
So I actually saw a friend on LinkedIn posting, this was in 2017, 2018. And I called her up and was like, "Are you just trying to be Miss Popularity?" I was actually just like, razzing her. And she was like, "You have to write a blog article." So I wrote a blog article about my opinions on behavioral customer segmentation, because that's another area where in marketing they want to assign you the segments, and you're like, "No, we're not trying to reinforce your current beliefs. We're trying to figure out what's going on with the data." So it was this piece on my opinions on that and the type of variables I look to put in unsupervised models for cluster analysis. And and I shared that and no one cared. But each year I speak at, or I guess I haven't spoken there in a couple of years, but I have spoken at my old alma mater, just going and speaking to the graduate students about what a career in data looks like, and just sharing my experience. And so I had to create a deck for it. And because I had this deck, I was like, okay, well, I'll write a blog article about this. I'll write some content for LinkedIn about this. And it did very well. Just tens of thousands of views on this article, and I hadn't ever experienced anything like that, but I just but that was fun, and I kept showing up. And then I made friends with Kate Strachny, and we they were already doing data science office hours, but they asked me to join. And so it was Terry Singh and Andreas Kretz and Eric Weber, and a couple other data science big names on LinkedIn. And I became a part of this community that I really enjoyed. And I really enjoy creating content and sharing it with others. And I became obsessed with content marketing, because because I was in e-commerce, I had a website builder that I could use for free for life. I have email marketing for free for life. And so I was like, I'm going to use these tools. So I was like playing with my tools. I was streaming YouTube videos to my TV to sit up in bed and watch about content creation while I eat snacks. Like, it just became something that I was very, very interested in, and I enjoyed doing. And so I kept going. And then, years later, I now have 90,000 followers.
Right. And you say you love sharing knowledge and educating others. What makes you so passionate about that?
That's, I think, how I've been since I was little. Like, I've, just always enjoyed sharing. I'm probably an oversharer just by nature. Um, and so it lends really well to this. Or I'll see something that somebody posted that I, don't necessarily agree with. And so I won't, I mean, I'd never call it out or whatever, but I'd, share, whether it's about p values or whatever, just making sure, because with a master's degree in statistics, it's a little bit different from taking a 1 semester course in college. And I like to share things that are a little bit deeper that people might not know about.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's very much appreciated by a big amount of people. And posting on LinkedIn and social media, there's also another side. At least that's what I experience. I've been posting on LinkedIn for a few years now, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy sharing ideas and getting discussion and learning and building new relationships like this one. And at the same time, in the last months, I've been less active on commenting and responding, and I've just scheduled out all my content because I noticed that the more I am on LinkedIn, the more restless I feel and the more urgency I feel in my body as well. Is that something, because it's also kind of addicting to me? I guess just like Instagram. I'm not big on Instagram.
Hmm.
I only have a small business account, but I don't use it personally. Um, is that something you can relate to? What is your experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd go on vacation and was, checking LinkedIn and still posting. And when COVID hit and my kids came home and I didn't have time for it anymore, I was very sad. But I took a break for like over a year, probably a year and a half. And I was so excited when I came back and actually my reach was fine. But that was a huge learning moment for me, was that if I put it down, my reach is not gonna disappear overnight. I mean, I don't know, they could make a change to the algorithm tomorrow, who knows? But I think that that was like really big for me, was that I can take a, that's where I learned that I can take a break. And I haven't needed to take a break since, you know, for a while. But I do understand that feeling, and the feeling that I have to perform and that I have to, be available and I have to be commenting and these people are going to wonder where I am. And, I feel like I have a much healthier relationship with LinkedIn since COVID, since taking that break and realizing that things weren't going to fall apart. I was still going to have opportunities. When I came back, and yeah, and that I wasn't going to lose the whole thing by walking away for a minute.
Yeah, it's a fear that many creators share. I think that if we don't create, if we don't post, if we don't publish, then the following will, yeah, you will lose the following, or the algorithm will mess us up. Yeah, so I can totally relate to that. So I'm happy to hear that you, yeah, took a break, even though it was not very, deliberate or by choice maybe.
Yeah.
But eventually it sounds like it worked out well.
Yeah. No, no.
Yeah,
All in all, it was good.
good. Yeah, so we're approaching the end of the conversation. We talked about many things, about communicating with stakeholders. We talked about your career decisions, how to understand the business goals better, how to present in a way that makes sense to stakeholders, even if they don't work in data, how to use storytelling, a bit about social media, about sharing knowledge. What is one big takeaway that you would like to, yeah, share with the listeners about this episode? What is one thing they really need to remember?
Yeah. I guess the biggest takeaway um, that I'd like to share is that building a relationship with your stakeholders is absolutely something that you need to be proactive about. If you have a poor relationship with your stakeholders currently, know that that is the status quo. That is not, you are not the exception, but to get out of that, you need to consciously think about how you can. And, I even had a meeting that I ran once a month, where I'd get together people from each analytics team and we would talk about the tests that we were running that month, so that they didn't interact. But before I did that, we were all just running tests and we'd occasionally have problems. And so if you're having problems, think about what you can do. If it's a meeting you can set up, if it's a conversation that you can have, to try and proactively mitigate that. And then that is also something that can probably go on your resume.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kristen. And we talked about LinkedIn a little bit. What are some places people can follow you, can benefit from your work on your website, and other places you want to shout out?
Yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn is really where I live. I'm also on Reddit, but um, my name over there is Clickatree with a C, like click, like because the I'm into building mechanical keyboards. Um, but really, like, follow me on LinkedIn, and I think that everyone should be on social media platforms for data, whether you're on Twitter, and I am on Twitter, or Instagram, like you mentioned. But I feel like so much of staying up to date with the analytics space and these changes that we're experiencing very rapidly is about just passively hanging out in the space and seeing this information that other people are sharing, and seeing the right news and seeing what people care about in the space. And I think that it is massively important.
Yeah, definitely. If you follow the right people, if you consume the right content, then there's so much to learn and so much to benefit from. Yeah. All right. Well, Kristen, again, thank you very much for today's conversation. Really enjoyed many new insights, practical insights on stakeholder communication and many other topics. So thanks again for talking here on the MindSpeaking podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me share. I appreciate it. This was a great talk.
Awesome. Then have a good day, Kristen.
All right, thanks. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.